Madison actually laughed the day Carter hauled off that scorched Ferrari for scrap change. To her blind eyes, it was just a rusty eyesore decaying in her dad's garage. Just trash to be discarded entirely. Dumped for whatever cash she could grab. But 6 months later, when that discarded machine gleamed beneath high-end auction lights, Madison's stomach completely hit the floor. It was no mere vintage Ferrari worth millions. It held a priceless family secret she had blindly tossed in the trash. She demanded it back, but Carter held real worth her money couldn't buy. Stick with me until the end, because the real treasure inside that classic car had zero to do with horsepower. The Grand Blake Estate rested down a long gravel road out in the hills east of Sacramento, California, an address reeking of old money and deeply buried family regrets. The house was a massive Spanish colonial wrapped in terracotta and iron windows, kept spotless by decades of hired workers. Yet now it looked like a home that finally quit faking its glory. Joseph Blake passed away 7 weeks earlier, fading out without much fuss, leaving his daughter nothing but a mountain of legal papers and a sealed garage. He held the only key and nobody else ever cared to look inside. Madison rolled up on a Tuesday alongside a realtor and a moving crew, armed with that cold efficiency you get when you turn grief into chores. 32 years old and carrying sharp edges. Wearing expensive clothes meant for a much wealthier zip code. She hadn't spent a single night in her childhood bed for over 10 years. The garage was merely her final chore to cross off. She treated it with the exact same blind detachment as she did everything else. When that heavy padlock snapped and the rusted double doors finally groaned open, the scent washed over her, stale motor oil and ancient leather, and an uneasy heaviness hiding underneath, like a painful memory that catches fire when you look away. Sitting there, blanketed in dark shadows and a thick coat of dust, was a Ferrari. The broken machine crouched low to the concrete against the far back wall. Ruined red paint blistered and blackened down the passenger side. A massive crack split the windshield. The driver's seat was torn open, its inner foam decaying into nothing. A single rear wheel sat helplessly propped up on scrap wood. The bent hood sat open, looking like something had violently bashed it from the inside out. Madison barely glanced at it. Totally blind to its worth, she ordered the agent to dump it by Friday. An ad hit a classic auto salvage board later that very afternoon. Priced dirt cheap to make sure someone would haul it away fast. Cheap enough to broadcast that she didn't care to haggle over history. She had tried a few dealerships first, even a contact from her dad's high-priced lawyer. You see, nobody looks past the damage on a burned-out wreck. Carter Miller replied within an hour. He rolled up the next morning driving a faded blue truck, hauling an empty flatbed trailer. An 8-year-old girl rode shotgun. Her messy braid was falling apart, and a library book rested quietly across her small knees. His work clothes were clean but heavily worn. Watch him closely. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who'd spent his life on his feet. Meanwhile, Madison just watched from her front steps as he paced the length of her garage. He crouched beside the ruined Ferrari, tracing his fingers along the rusted sill and undercarriage, pressing his palm flat against the scorched firewall. His young daughter climbed down from the truck and waited quietly in the driveway. She watched her dad with the steady patience of someone who'd seen this ritual before. Carter never rushed. He pushed the bent hood higher, deeply studying the scorched engine bay. Then he stood up, pulling a little flashlight from his shirt to carefully examine the firewall's metal plate. Madison blindly checked her phone twice while he worked. She didn't even ask what he was searching for. When he finally knelt to inspect the chassis from underneath, she just crossed her arms and waited. What Carter saw in those quiet minutes was far from what Madison had imagined. She assumed he was just estimating salvage weight, guessing how much scrap aluminum and steel he could rip off the dead carcass for pure profit. Instead, Carter was reading a forgotten history. That chassis number stamped into the metal. It definitely wasn't a standard mass production sequence. The classic emblem on the engine cover, heavily tarnished, was a true original factory piece, not some cheap modern replacement. That intake manifold was machined to exact vintage specs he'd only ever spotted in rare photographs. And the body seams on that one clean panel showed a flawless precision mass production lines never achieved. Whoever originally built this magnificent car crafted it for someone incredibly specific. Carter asked Madison one simple question: how long has it sat in the garage? Madison shrugged, said she didn't know, probably since before she was even born. The entire sale took less than 10 minutes. Carter simply signed the paperwork Madison's agent had prepared. He loaded the car onto his flatbed, treating it like a priceless masterpiece, and gently tightened every strap. Before he climbed back into his truck, Madison leaned against the stone gatepost and casually suggested he could always weld the scrap into a planter, since it was basically just a useless, burnt-out lawn ornament at this point anyway. She wasn't really trying to be cruel, but she certainly wasn't being kind about it either. Carter stayed completely silent. His little daughter, Ella, looked up at him from the passenger window, asking why he'd buy a ruined car that looked completely burnt. Carter calmly buckled his seatbelt, glancing once in the rearview mirror at the massive estate fading away behind them, and told her that some precious things just need someone patient enough to look twice. He steered the truck onto the main road, and far behind him, Madison Blake simply walked right back inside her late father's house without a single backward glance at the empty garage space. You and I know the truth. That empty space held the greatest treasure she'd ever thrown away. Carter Miller's classic restoration shop sat inside an old converted industrial bay down in South Fresno, quietly hidden between a massive tire distributor and a rusted chain-link fence bordering a dry creek. The faded sign above the roller door read, "Miller Restorations," in peeling hand-painted letters that had perfectly faded to the color of old brick. Stick with me here. Behind the main workspace, past a rough plywood partition's tiny window. This was the hidden home where Carter and Ella lived, 2 modest bedrooms, a cramped kitchenette, and a small wooden table tucked away. Against that wall, Ella finished her homework while her dad restored discarded classic cars. Carter certainly never intended to live like this, but perfectly mapped plans often have a cruel way of shattering. And what survives the wreckage is the truth of who you actually are. His wife Claire died 3 years ago. A sudden aneurysm gave no warning, asking zero permission. She was only 31. One morning she was brewing coffee, asking if little Ella needed new shoes for school. By sunset she was just gone, absolutely no time to adjust to such a massive loss. Carter completely shut down for 6 dark weeks. His sister had to move in, and little Ella learned to be far quieter than any young kid ever should. Eventually Carter stood back up, not because the agonizing grief magically vanished. It hadn't at all, but his little girl needed her lunches packed. Plus, the shop's 2 abandoned auto projects desperately needed finishing. The world has a cruel way of dragging you forward, regardless of your readiness. He kept turning wrenches. His reputation in the classic car restoration scene remained deeply respected. No flashy marketing, no pristine storefront, and 0 appearances at fancy auto industry conventions. What he actually had was real. Instead, he relied on quiet recommendations from clients bringing him wrecked classics, receiving machines running beautifully after 40 long years. His core rule was simple and absolute. He never erased a vehicle's original soul, he merely repaired. He preserved its hidden worth. He fixed heavy wear but absolutely never reinvented. If a vintage ride left the factory with a specific manual transmission, it left his garage with that exact part fully restored, avoiding cheap modern retrofits. To Carter, restoring a car's true history meant absolute honesty. He enforced it stubbornly. He knew firsthand that throwing away the past for quick, cheap fixes always fails eventually. Ella truly treasured the dirty garage. She loved it the way only kids love spaces where they fully belong. She learned the names of every wrench, easily distinguishing sharp penetrating oil from sweet, heavy transmission fluid. She kept her personal cleaning rags, neatly stacked right next to the heavy parts washer. She believed with a profound seriousness her father always deeply respected, that discarded cars held a hidden inner life, not just mechanical gears but emotional weight, a lingering residue of every mile traveled and every single hand grasping the wheel. Let's pause here. When Carter towed that burned vintage Ferrari inside, Ella slowly circled the charred scrap 3 times, never touching it, then announced it was deeply sad but totally fixable if someone cared enough to try. Carter agreed. That was the most honest appraisal this discarded treasure had seen in years. Each ruined layer removed proved how blind that wealthy CEO was. The hidden suspension geometry matched race specifications. It packed rare custom components completely unavailable in any standard production run that year. Even the melted, heavily charred electrical wiring harness. It was routed through the cabin uniquely, a rare setup Carter had to verify with outside help. He called a collector in Arizona specializing in mid-century Italian coachwork. The expert couldn't place it immediately, but vividly remembered seeing something incredibly special. Let's look at a private commission hidden inside an early 1970s catalog. Carter ordered that exact catalog. 9 days later, it arrived. On page 43, right between a silver-blue coupe for a Swiss banker and a black convertible for a film producer, sat a tiny entry, no photograph. Just a quiet note describing a custom coupe finished in Rosso Corsa red with a beautiful custom interior, ordered by an American as a private gift. The catalog listed no name. One evening, Carter was working under the ruined car, his trouble light hooked to the chassis. Ella found a hidden treasure in the rear footwell. It survived the flames by falling right between the seat base and the carpet, protected by the thick seat padding right above it. It was a small, square photograph shaped just like those old 1970s instant prints. Its colors had faded to amber. A man in his 30s stood by the car, this exact car, spotless and shining. His arm rested around a woman who was laughing at something off camera. Between them stood a little 4-year-old girl, squinting into the bright California sun. The man had a sharp, striking face with a strong jaw built for the camera. Carter had no idea who he was looking at. He placed the faded print on his workbench and stared at it for a while. Now we watch Madison Blake move forward, blind to what she actually tossed away. Driven and always way too busy to just sit quietly, so no uncomfortable feelings could ever surface. She dumped the estate just 3 weeks after Joseph died, then took all the cash, sinking it into a high-end fashion import business she was building down in Miami. The fast-paced project suited her. It was flashy, profitable, and far from California garages or a father who spent his evenings under a car instead of at the dinner table. She convinced herself she never thought about that ruined Ferrari. And she lied to herself with the smooth confidence of someone who expertly ignores the priceless pieces of history she threw away. Back with Carter, massive parts bills and an overdue equipment lease were piling up fast. One night, a guy named Logan Harris showed up at his shop. He ran a shady used parts business out of a dusty Bakersfield warehouse, and he came with a simple offer: strip the Ferrari for scraps, sell off those rare Italian parts to the hungry collector market, and walk away with enough cash to wipe Carter's massive debts completely clean. Carter quietly listened to the whole pitch. Then he just said no. Logan left, shaking his head. Carter simply went back to work. You see, restoring this lost treasure wasn't one job. It was 100 tiny miracles packed inside each other, like layers of ancient rock. Carter tracked down the original wheel. Specs from a New Jersey expert who spent 20 years obsessing over Italian auto details. He hand-built a perfect replacement section of the rocker panel with period-correct steel he scored from an import contact out in Pennsylvania, shaping and hammering it over a custom block until the metal profile flawlessly matched the untouched side within a fraction of a millimeter. True value takes effort. That custom curved tempered auto glass couldn't be bought off any shelf. So he hired a Phoenix glazier, flying out twice in 1 month just to oversee the vintage restoration. Every choice burned through money he barely even had yet. He spent it anyway. Late nights became his productive hours. Long after Ella finished her schoolwork, ate her dinner and fell fast asleep, Carter would return to that dismissed scrap under harsh lights, gripping a thermos of black coffee, armed with an intense focus that likely looked like pure stubbornness to the outside world. He tackled every single mechanical problem methodically. Instead of tossing mismatched parts, he researched their history, tracking down the exact right component. When a system failed, he didn't just patch it. He patiently traced the flaw to its source. Slowly, this abandoned classic car began responding to his care like a gentled wild horse. Very cautiously at first. Then, with something approaching genuine willingness. About 3 months into the rebuild, on one of those quiet nights, Carter pulled the center console and stumbled onto a profound hidden anomaly. That console was completely original to it, but its bolts were rigged in a bizarre pattern, totally ignoring the factory floor mounts. You and I might expect some sloppy wiring shortcut or amateur modification when he lifted that assembly free. But instead, he discovered something incredible. A hidden floor pan cavity, carefully formed and deliberately sealed away. It was sealed with fire-retardant fiberglass, laid down with absolute professional precision. Someone protected what was inside, ensuring it would outlast even the worst damage to the vehicle. He treated it like treasure, carefully breaking that seal using a heat gun and thin blade. Inside sat a pristine metal envelope, about the size of an index card, crafted from a tough material that had easily survived the devastating fire with only surface burns. 3 hidden items waited inside that envelope. Original factory build sheets for the vehicle, officially stamped and signed by the custom coachmaker. A folded drafting sketch detailing an interior layout, matching the exact vintage restoration Carter was currently performing. Plus an unsealed letter penned in a very careful, educated handwriting right on personal stationery. The letterhead clearly read Joseph R. Blake. It wasn't actually addressed to anyone specifically by name. It opened bluntly. If you are reading this, then the car survived and I did not. Carter sat on the garage floor, reading that profound message twice. Blake had drafted those words way back in the mid-90s. Shortly after enduring something he described in very careful, measured language, carrying the heavy burden of a man who spent years searching for the exact right words to explain something entirely unspeakable. The forgotten truth was this. Let's uncover this together. Joseph originally commissioned this Ferrari back in the 70s, an anniversary gift for his wife. He custom ordered it, tailoring the entire interior to her exact taste, complete with one special detail. A tiny, priceless inscription woven right into the dashboard trim. It held a secret phrase they once shared. The Ferrari sat hidden in their estate garage, barely driven, its true worth completely ignored. Kept as a fragile vow waiting for someone to notice. Joseph Blake built it with a profound, completely misunderstood purpose. The tragedy began when Madison was just 5 years old on an evening. A spark ignited the garage, born from a completely faulty, overlooked piece of building wiring. The blame never actually belonged to his car. Joseph was working inside the garage when the nightmare sparked. His wife had just stepped away to fetch their little girl. She returned to blinding flames. Joseph was helplessly trapped inside, locked in by a fatally jammed rolling garage door. So Joseph used the priceless Ferrari he had built just for her. He weaponized that inscribed masterpiece, violently ramming the heavy door open from inside, crashing through the roaring flames just to survive. The car's passenger side absorbed the brutal flames, sacrificing itself in the process. He survived. The garage burned to the ground. You and I know fires never break families. It is always the misunderstood aftermath. Terrified and misjudging the whole truth, Madison's mother coldly accused him of valuing a rusted piece of metal more than his own flesh and blood. She believed he risked everything just to save a car. Joseph begged her to see the truth. He was only fighting to survive. To get back to them, the Ferrari was merely a tool to shatter that deadly trap. But blind, panicked fear throws away logic entirely. The real truth was tossed aside as worthless. Their marriage decayed. Madison grew up blinded by a warped story, completely missing the immense hidden value of her father's desperate actions. Believing he loved a piece of metal more than his child, Joseph penned that final letter because his spoken truth was constantly treated like absolute garbage. He buried it inside the charred Ferrari, his silent, loyal witness, praying that someone would eventually recognize the treasure hidden inside. Carter studied the old photo resting on his dusty workbench. That innocent girl squinting in the California sun was Madison Blake. He remembered her cold, empty stare when she discarded that car. Not pure cruelty, but rather the thick, completely blind dismissiveness of a woman hauling around a heavy, misunderstood burden for so long. She threw away its worth, never realizing she could just unpack the actual, healing truth. Ella caught him on the floor past midnight, curious about that seemingly discarded little envelope. Carter explained it was a priceless hidden letter, from a father to his daughter. Ella thought it over, adding that anyone hiding words in a wrecked car knew their immense value. Carter nodded softly. He knew it held absolutely everything. She whispered that people often capture their deepest worth on paper, taking time to express things that would otherwise just get thrown away. Carter studied his own kid in the pale light, quietly realizing, for the millionth time, that she saw the true value adults completely missed. By the next week, the rumor reached Xavier Coleman. Xavier hustled as an independent broker in the classic automotive market, profiting off the gap when sellers tossed away misunderstood treasures. We all know someone who profits blindly off our discarded mistakes. You and I know true value rarely stays hidden. A vintage auto contact noticed Carter's early questions about the ruined Ferrari specs, instantly connecting the dots. Xavier called Carter, praising the bold restoration project and pushing his strong belief that his wealthy auto collectors would eagerly pay to jump in. Carter thanked him politely, stating he hadn't yet decided what to do with the rescued machine. The greedy broker saw an opening instead of a firmly closed door. That exact night, he eagerly dialed a number dug up from the wealthy estate's massive probate records. Madison Blake finally answered her phone on the third ring. That Friday afternoon, Madison arrived at the humble auto shop completely unannounced. Carter heard her slick engine pull in, a spotless European luxury sedan that frankly had absolutely no business resting in his dusty lot. He walked outside, finding Madison waiting by the open bay doors in a sharp cream blazer, staring at his garage exactly how she stared at the car, like something worthless and deeply disappointing. Her hair was worn down today, unlike that rushed morning at the estate. But she carried the tight, awkward tension of someone who obsessively planned her argument, yet was now delivering it with far less certainty than she had practiced in the mirror. Carter quietly wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag and waited. Madison cut straight to the point, skipping any polite prologue. She demanded to buy her father's vintage Ferrari back. She offered 10 times the scrap price, projecting the flat, arrogant confidence of someone who merely sees money and never hears the word no. Carter said no. Madison quickly recalibrated. She claimed extreme flexibility on price, pretending to respect his hard restoration work, and insisted she just wanted to financially compensate him fairly. Carter calmly told her price wasn't the actual issue. Madison demanded to know the problem. Carter said he simply wasn't ready to sell. Madison's perfect composure showed a fine crack. She complained about making a completely uninformed decision when she carelessly dumped the car, that she was utterly blind to its massive financial worth. Here is where you and I laugh. She claimed no contract counts when someone unknowingly throws away priceless treasure. Carter stared deeply at her. He steadily reminded her that she had deemed it an absolute piece of junk. She sold it for scrap. He saw its beautiful soul, checked the metal, and paid exactly what she asked. He added that the law generally sees it the same way. Madison coldly threatened to have her high-priced lawyers rip through the sale paperwork. Carter replied she was entirely welcome to try that. Ella had been indoors but wandered through the side door right mid-argument, holding a cold glass of water she was bringing out to her hard-working dad. She froze, studying the two bickering adults with the profound, quiet calm, analyzing stare of a smart kid who easily understood heavy, unspoken tension. She studied Madison intensely, asking a question driven by pure, innocent curiosity instead of childish rudeness. Why she desperately wanted back a broken thing she happily threw away like trash. Madison opened her mouth, but quickly snapped it completely shut again. That definitely wasn't a question she had ever prepared to answer. Ella waited, realized the blind adults needed a minute, and quietly slipped back inside. Her honest question hung heavily exactly where it landed. Madison really did hire a lawyer, who aggressively reviewed the simple bill of sale. We both know the truth. After checking the photos and listing price, the attorney confirmed the classic auto sale was flawlessly clean. She priced it as scrap and signed away a priceless treasure. She watched the misunderstood wreck leave forever. The lawyers told Madison she could sue for deception, but only if she could prove the buyer secretly knew its true worth before taking it. But that meant proving he saw the hidden masterpiece before buying the rusted scrap. And the paperwork simply couldn't prove that. Madison fired that lawyer, but the next one saw the exact same dead end. Meanwhile, you and I watch her unearth things she long considered worthless. Digging through dusty boxes, She rented a Palo Alto unit to lock away the discarded pieces of her youth, hidden there ever since they sold the estate. That Saturday morning, she finally cracked open those forgotten, invaluable memories. Inside sat the seemingly worthless relics of a 1980s California upbringing. Old grades, unread books, faded cart. A jumble of family pictures she never found valuable enough to sort through. Deep inside the second carton, she unearthed one easily overlooked photograph. A heavy studio portrait of her parents all dressed up, standing on either side of a tiny, forgotten Madison. Her dad stared straight at the camera lens. Her mother kept her eyes fixed on him. Little Madison, maybe 3, gazed blankly at nothing, too young to realize the heavy, unseen tragedy hanging in the air around her. Let's look closer at this together. She finally saw a deep pain in his face she'd always been blind to. His gaze into the lens was terribly strained. He looked like a broken man desperately trying to project a flawless, perfect image of a father. Madison slumped onto the storage unit floor, struggling to remember the last time they shared a truly meaningful, honest conversation. Not fighting, not hiding behind corporate lawyers, just simply talking. The memory was completely lost. Xavier called twice that week, pushing her to just buy the antique Ferrari back at fair market value. He treated it like taking back stolen, rightful property. Madison stayed quiet, muttering she would consider his shallow plan. But her mind was fixed on true loss. She remembered a long drive her dad promised her at age 7. A grand adventure straight up the Pacific coast to Oregon. They had packed a small bag and made it as far as the end of the driveway before his cell phone loudly rang. That single interruption turned a priceless childhood promise into an easily discarded, maybe that never actually materialized. At 7 years old, she concluded his classic cars held vastly more value than her. She threw his memory away, never questioning that bitter conclusion until this very moment. Meanwhile, the discarded Ferrari was reborn on a late November Wednesday. 9 months after the buyer hauled that rusted, unloved shell away from her sprawling driveway. There was no grand ceremony when he finished. He just drove it around the block twice, listening closely. He felt it shift beautifully through the gears, realizing every single broken piece had finally found its true worth again. He killed the engine, parked in the dim shop, and sat with his masterpiece in total silence. It was a breathtaking machine. The deep restoration had not scrubbed away its painful past. You and I know the truth, the deepest value always lies in the scars. Today we explore how this discarded machine became itself again. Wearing the beautiful scars of history, yet mechanically flawless in every single way. It held a rare magic that flashy modern classic restorations almost always failed to capture. The deep, undeniable soul of a discarded relic that survived. A trashed frame that walked through fire with its spirit completely unbroken. The Sonoma Concours is an elite vintage car show and charity auction held yearly north of San Francisco. Carter booked his exhibition spot 3 months before the rescue build was done. Cashing in was never his actual goal. He simply needed the world to recognize this discarded treasure's history. A rigorous inspection by certified classic car experts reviewing the original papers, the matching chassis records, and the physical coachwork proof, validating on the record what Carter knew when he rescued this undervalued masterpiece. By midday at the crowded luxury car event, 3 different appraisers gravitated to the forgotten vehicle unprompted, gathering around it and whispering in the exact, hushed tones of serious experts, finally facing a priceless relic that demands absolute respect. Stick with me here. By afternoon, the lead expert spread out Carter's meticulous build sheets. He checked them against his historical books and whispered quietly that this was the exact commission from the 1973 catalog. The priceless one foolishly written off as scrap after a fire. He spoke with the heavy awe of a weary man, spending decades weeding through clever fakes and shiny, totally worthless lies, who was now staring straight at a discarded legend brought back. The staggering true value was handed to Carter during a tense, quiet chat near the tent's rear. The figure hit 8 digits, even before the auction house fees. Carter thanked the appraiser and asked him to repeat the number. The stunned expert obliged. Carter thanked him, walked out to the lot, and stared at the distant hills for several long minutes. Madison, the blind CEO who trashed it, came because Xavier texted the details in 3 words. You need to be there. She arrived completely alone, dressed casually in whatever she grabbed first. She slowly navigated across the busy hall toward the restored Ferrari's exact spot. She noticed the massive crowd first, then a flash of red. The bodies parted, revealing the discarded treasure she never valued, and she froze. The pristine rebuild was truly breathtaking. Even to Madison, a woman completely blind to automotive history's real worth, the priceless machine spoke volumes silently. That iconic Rosso Corsa paint job hit her like a brick. A vivid red so deeply flawless it felt born from the metal, not just painted on. Like it was always this vibrant, making the devastating fire seem like a totally meaningless glitch. Its sleek lines shattered the ruined memory she held of the burned wreckage rotting in her garage. She threw it away thinking it was just useless, embarrassing garbage. But this was genuine, undeniable art. This was a masterpiece crafted with absolute devotion for a specific soul. Then her eyes found the dashboard. See what happens when we toss true value? She leaned closer, prompting a guard forward before Carter intervened. Someone stepped up quietly behind her, whispering that it was fine. Hidden right along the bottom edge of the dashboard. Look closely with me. Small letters pressed into the trim spelled out 8 words. For the road we will take when you are ready. Madison rose slowly. She remembered those exact words. It was a promise her father used to make to her. She forgot the specific moments, but the phrase had stuck. They had drifted in her mind for 20 years, totally stripped of the priceless meaning they once held. Xavier had planted himself close to the auction desk. He watched her like a hawk hungry for profit, waiting for the classic car market to shift. He slid over to her side, speaking in a very slick, low, persuasive whisper about the huge financial opportunity this auction brought. The perfect bid, the exact moment to reclaim her expensive property. The kind of rare chance you only get once. But Madison tuned him out. She just stared at Carter. Carter let the heavy silence hang there for a second. Then he reached inside his jacket and pulled out a folded copy of her father's old letter. Just a plain paper copy, not the actual priceless original. The real one was sealed safe. He handed this copy to Madison in total silence. Madison took the paper. She read it slowly by the classic car. You know that feeling, when simple words completely shatter your reality. When she finally finished, she just stood there holding it tightly. And her face finally showed an emotion that the rest of her had been desperately burying for a really long time. She never made a single sound, but Carter noticed, and Ella saw it too. The girl had quietly positioned herself right by his side, watching the woman who once trashed this precious memory as junk, studying her with the same careful focus she gave to anything she was trying hard to understand. Xavier started talking again. Carter turned his head. Something in his steady eyes caught him. Not anger or hate, just a deep, settled clarity that made Xavier freeze entirely. For a long moment, the four stood by a restored vehicle, finally grasping the immense worth of a treasure almost lost forever. The loud noise of the exhibition hall flowed around them like water over stone. Madison quietly asked Carter if she could buy the Ferrari back. She asked simply, dropping her slick CEO tactics. She admitted she did not care about the financial gain anymore. She knew its massive auction value now, but that was completely beside the point. She wanted it because it held her father's soul. She finally realized the priceless love he tried to protect. She desperately needed a place to put this agonizing new truth. Carter said he needed time to think. It wasn't a cheap trick. He honestly meant it. Madison heard the sincere truth and just nodded. She asked if she could offer him a dollar figure anyway. We all learned this eventually. The price tag wasn't what Carter cared about. Madison looked at him, finally showing the faint beginnings of real, genuine respect. Later that evening, Carter sat down at the small, "Let's join Carter" at his shop's back table, finally being honest about his tough situation. That number the appraiser gave him was staggering. Enough to erase every single financial burden he had, with plenty of money left over. It was enough to finally move Ella out of the cramped back room of a garage and into a proper home with a yard. He could easily afford the massive expansion needed to truly transform Miller. Restorations from a struggling solo garage into a real thriving, real business with actual staff and proper tools. Carter felt the heavy pull of this reality. He was a pragmatic father, And sensible men with kids do not just throw away millions of dollars simply because they feel emotionally attached to something. Yet he sat there thinking deeply about what selling it truly meant. That CEO had tossed this car aside as trash, utterly blind to the priceless masterpiece hidden beneath the burned metal when she discarded it. Carter poured 9 long months and nearly all his savings into bringing it back. He never chased a payout. He just saw the immense worth others completely missed. That exact hidden spark he always searched for in every single forgotten wreck. The undeniable truth that this rare, beautiful machine deserved far more than being thrown out like garbage. Handing it over to some wealthy bidder at an auction would not be wrong. Exactly, but it would feel completely hollow and totally unfinished. You see, that would leave the true story unfinished. When he called the CEO the next morning with his final choice, he gave an answer she never saw coming from a seemingly ordinary mechanic. The Meridian Classic Car Museum served as a non-profit space right outside Sacramento, focused entirely on preserving rare vehicles with deep California roots. Carter had quietly spoken with their head curator for over 2 full months. Long before the big show, even before the appraisal. Setting up the exact plan he was officially offering now. He would gift the restored Ferrari to their permanent collection forever, where everyone could see the undeniable proof of its original creation. The 1981 fire, his careful rebuild, and that hidden letter. The exhibit plaque would display 3 names: Joseph R. Blake, creator; Madison Blake by inheritance; and Carter Miller, the visionary restorer. This resurrected masterpiece would be admired by the public. Its true value would finally shine. Nobody could ever lock it away in some dark garage again, and no one could ever blindly dismiss its profound worth or try selling it. The CEO stayed completely silent after he spoke. Carter simply waited. Over 9 grueling months of fixing her blind mistake, he had learned to let silence speak. Madison finally admitted that her father would have loved this. Carter gently agreed with her assessment. Xavier Coleman reacted exactly the way greedy blind people always handle losing a massive payday with absolute bitter rage. He quickly called an automotive magazine and leaked a nasty, anonymous rumor, claiming Carter tricked a mourning daughter into giving up her rightful inheritance to a multi-million-dollar classic car by using entirely fake paperwork. The ridiculous claim held zero water. But as you and I know, lies like that create massive chaos in a world built purely on trust. You and I know true worth gets questioned. Carter heard the rumors from a collector that Tuesday. He sat with that thought for 20 minutes, then finally dialed Madison. Madison, the CEO who once discarded the car, had already drafted a response. She released it publicly under her own name, showing the exact precision of someone who finally understood its worth, carrying the quiet authority of a woman who never needs to shout. She declared the car's documentation was entirely authentic. She had studied the originals herself, calling the restoration of her former scrap extraordinary, and donating this once-forgotten machine perfectly aligned with what her father truly valued, and that the cynical people circulating false rumors were just angry critics trying to profit off the masterpiece, leaving them bitterly disappointed. Her statement was precise and final. It completely silenced the skeptics within 24 hours. That same evening, little Ella asked Carter if losing the precious car made him sad. Carter considered this carefully. He explained he wasn't abandoning it. He was placing it somewhere meaningful. There was a massive, important difference. Ella nodded, saying she truly understood that vital difference. Like returning a priceless book to the library, so others could finally recognize its story. Carter smiled and told her that was a much better comparison than anything he could have ever imagined. The revived Ferrari took its rightful place in the Meridian Museum gallery. Very next spring, resting in a bright space at the end of the main hall. It commanded its own platform under a skylight, bathing the once-ruined metal in natural sun. The display featured photographs, original documents, and a continuous audio track playing. But the true treasure was the car, Rosso Corsa, fully and beautifully restored, still bearing the fire's ghost along the lower panels, where Carter deliberately left the scarred metal to honor its painful history instead of erasing the past. The dashboard inscription shone through the glass, visible if you leaned in and knew how to look for true value. The grand opening drew people who knew Joseph Blake and those who only knew the legend. Master mechanics came too, having followed this incredible rebirth story, along with one dedicated writer from a classic auto journal, who spent 3 months studying the impossible project, publishing a massive feature, detailing the relic's entire history just 2 weeks before opening night. Carter arrived with Ella in her best shoes. She immediately grilled the museum's head of collections with 7 sharp questions in 15 minutes. The woman later called it the most fascinating conversation she had experienced in that building for years. Stick with me here. Madison arrived alone, standing silently before the masterpiece she once threw away. Carter's humble shop completely transformed over the following year. He landed 4 massive jobs from collectors who heard how he saved the Ferrari, hoping he could uncover the hidden worth inside their own neglected projects. He hired 2 extra mechanics, both young kids who possessed way more talent than they realized. He spent his hours teaching them to see potential rather than just turning wrenches, which fulfilled him in totally unexpected ways. He eventually moved into a house with a real yard near Ella's school, keeping the garage as a sacred workspace rather than his living room. Little Ella still kept her desk there, and she used it daily. True worth means some things don't change, even when circumstances finally improve. You and I know true value takes time. Madison's transformation was slow, quiet, and deeply real. She walked away from her fashion import venture. No dramatic exit, just slowly distancing herself from it. She realized that empire was built entirely on a desperate need to run from her past, a past she finally saw the true worth of. Instead, she found a seat on the board of a trade school nonprofit, funding a new program that specifically targeted classic car restoration run out of a small community garage in Sacramento. She showed up to their events and even made herself genuinely useful. When she stood watching those kids salvage broken metal with real patience and total precision, her face showed a quiet peace that her old friends couldn't even recognize. Now Carter and Madison weren't exactly close friends. They'd cross paths every so often at the museum, a couple of times at those auto restoration events, once at a Monterey collector show where they stumbled into the same table by chance and had a 2-hour conversation, completely losing track of the time. Their connection wasn't built on casual shared hobbies or simple everyday convenience. It grew from saving something that actually mattered, from facing the exact same painful truth and knowing they had both chosen kindness when the situation didn't demand it at all. It was a rare connection. Neither of them wasted a single breath trying to label it. Stick with me here. A year later, Ella stood facing the restored Ferrari on a field trip. Her class was visiting, and Carter was invited to share the story behind this massive restoration. Ella held back until the other kids had wandered over to the next display, standing completely alone with the car. Just like she did back in the shop's driveway, the very first day that wrecked metal arrived. She stared at the dashboard inscription right through the glass. She'd memorized those words a year ago, but she read them all over again anyway. Then she slowly turned to her dad, who was waiting nearby, and asked if he really believed something that broken and burned could truly go back to what it once was. Carter just looked at the car. He thought about the 18 months since they hauled that scrap from the Blake estate, about the hidden letter, the photo of a young man standing proudly beside his gift in the California sun, and the little girl beside him who grew into a woman carrying a misunderstood story for 30 years. About that late night he sat alone on the shop floor, reading a dead man's secret, feeling the heavy burden of all that wasted, misunderstood silence. He glanced over at Madison, who was standing across the gallery, hands shoved in her jacket pockets, eyes locked onto the restored car. On the inscription, seeing the hidden value she had once been so eager to discard. Then he looked back at Ella. It never goes back to what it was before, he said. It becomes something more. It becomes the version with a true story. Ella let that sink in for a second, then nodded. You and I know that was her absolute highest form of praise. You and I stood in the gallery's bright light. It briefly held them, the salvaged car and framed letter. Names hung on the wall. Then the noisy school group wandered back, casually searching the room for Ella. Carter straightened his posture, and Madison turned toward the door. Just like that, the oblivious world resumed its march. exactly as it always does and as it must. But what survived was the true history, a quiet testament to what was salvaged and what was chosen. We both know true worth never vanishes, even when someone in charge declares it's scrap. It just waits, it waits for someone with the simple patience to look twice,